Hey guys, right, welcome back to another video. So if you watched the last one, you'll have seen where we got onto with the arch and welding all of that in. I'll show you that in a moment because we've made some more progress off camera. But anyway, in this one, we are going to be looking at our rear end, assembling it or as much as we can off the car and basically just going through that. So there's our lovely new rear end, looking pretty good. So I've had all of this shot blasted. If you remember, when I took the car apart, everything was rusty as hell, and the frame wasn't that clean. So because I knew I wanted to do this silver, I ended up using another subframe I had, because when you paint the frame, if you paint it a dark colour, say black, like it would be stock, then any rust or pitting doesn't show up too bad. So I knew I wanted to paint the silver so it would pop on the car. So I ended up sourcing a cleaner frame. You can still see some pitting, you know, in places. It's not perfect if you look up close, you know, in these and stuff. So you can still see some remnants of some of the rust that was on there, but for the most part it's a pretty clean frame. I'm stoked with how it's come out. So yeah, pretty happy with that. So just for future, if you're going to get your subframe powder coated or blasted, it is a service that I can offer. I can supply them, just the bushes. I can supply the whole lot built up with new bushes, bearings, handbrake, assembly, whatever, brake upgrades. So whatever you need, you can drop me a message if this is something you're interested in. Happy to supply and fit. But yeah, anyway, enough plugging my own crap. Back to what you're interested in. So that's now been painted and basically ready for reassembly. My good friend, Mr. Handy, Shipbox Enthusiast, or whatever his YouTube name is now, Average Auto, I'll tag him. He popped by this morning and built up the wheel bearings, put the top bush in, the ball joint, and the brand new handbrake assembly, new fittings and stuff like that. So he's done that for me, which is amazing. Saved me a bit of time. But yeah, now we've got to put all the powerflex in there, clean out a few of the threads and stuff, and we've got the anti-roll bar to build up, and then we've got a few bits and pieces that need to go back on there. So yeah, I've been hoarding all these parts for ages and I'm getting fed up and moving them and tripping over them. So I figured if I at least build everything up, then that's some stuff out my way. So yeah, we'll get onto that in a moment. Anyway, to the car. So if you remember last time, I got the outer arch put on. So that's all there, lovely, ready for some body work at a later date. But I also managed to get the filler neck area welded in. That's all seam welded, lovely. Again, it will need a bit of filler work just to tidy up some of these areas where I've welded. But that is now sorted, which is amazing. We've still got to finish off this sill. There's a little bit left to do down there. But like I say, we'll get back to that at some point. I need to basically chuck the side skirt on and just check that the lines and stuff are where I want them to be, because I have a feeling it's a bit proud here, so I might need to tease that into shape. But yeah, so there's probably another couple of hours worth of welding and fettling to do, but the main thing is it's on. The filler neck is all done. So yeah, it's coming together pretty nicely. So we've got a bit of a game plan. Those of you who've watched this build from day one, which was about a year ago now, obviously time is ticking on. I've missed my deadline. We're now into November, but the main thing is I had a big push and got the arch into it, which is amazing. But we've had some issues, well, not so much issues, but having the car at the back of the workshop here, it's such a mess and it's so hard to work in because there's no natural light. If you work on it, you're covered in dust and crap, there's no fresh air. So the plan is basically we're going to get this built up and then put on the car, and then we're going to bring the car out, spin it around, because once the car is here, what I've learned is if a car lands here, work gets done really quickly, and we churn through it and get everything done to a good standard. When the car's sat back there, it sits there for a year and nothing really happens very fast. So yeah, the plan is we're going to bring the car out of the unit once you put the rear end on, and then we're going to spin it around and push it back in and then get it back up in the air, and then that way it's going to be a bit nice, a bit more room to work, because down there it's very cramped and dark. Obviously I know my lighting in the unit isn't the best. It's not really been an issue all summer because, you know, it's fine. But yeah, certainly this time of year where it gets dark. So that's something I'm going to sort out now. I've got the budget to sort the lighting situation, so we will work on that. Don't you worry about that. But yeah, anyway, so let's get into the meat of it, which is getting all this assembled. We've got our diff carrier. So we've got 5 bushes that go directly on there. So we've got the 2 rear, 2 front, and then the diff bush. So let's start with the diff bush. So if you've ever used polyurethane bushes before, you'll know there's lots of different brands out there. Most of them do the job okay. I like to use Powerflex. You get lifetime warranty on it, and generally just the fit and finish of these bushes is superior to other brands. That's not to say other brands are particularly bad. Some are not as good as Powerflex. So for me, the extra money you pay for the peace of mind, it's got a lifetime warranty, it's well worth using this stuff. So I like to stick with it. So with most of them, you get a pot of grease or a packet of grease in every bag or every container. A nice coating of grease to the outside of the bush. Most of these, if you've ever used these, they come with a QR code these days. You scan that and it will give you installation instructions. Some bushes you don't actually grease, believe it or not. Certain ones, like on an E36, the front lollipop bushes you don't grease because the bush can rotate under load. So generally you want to avoid that. So these push in lovely, and then you've got your metal insert. I feel like this is a bit of a sales ad. It's not meant to be a sales ad. I'm just putting my bushes in and vlogging. And then push the insert in. A little rubber mallet wouldn't go amiss now, just to tap things into place. Make sure that's all seated. And then just with like some of these bushes, you get a washer that you're supposed to use, or like on the front diff bush, there's actually 2 washers. So like on this one, obviously read the instructions, but I know I've used these loads of times. Big washer on the front, little washer on the back. Get rid of that. Next up we have our front and rear subframe bushes. Let's get rid of all these boxes out of the way. There is 2 different grades of Powerflex. Well, technically there's multiple grades, but you've got the Road series, the Heritage series, or the Track series. So these ones are the Road series. They're still fine for track use, to be honest. I use them on the touring. But these ones are like, the hardness of the bush is such that it's not crazy stiff. So you know you can use them on the road and they won't shake your teeth out. Obviously they are stiffer than a rubber bush, but not to the point where they're absolutely solid. So yeah, they're fine on the road, to be honest. I mean, in an E36, they're not the most comfortable car in the world anyway. So realistically, you know, if you're modifying a 36, comfort isn't your biggest priority. Yeah, so comfort probably isn't your biggest priority. If it was, then you might be tempted to go for they've got a range called a Heritage range. So you get a nice soft compliant bush. They're black, or like a dark colour, so they look like rubber, so they look OEM basically. These purple ones, obviously they're not everyone's taste colour wise, but they do the job really well. The black series, if you want them, they are, well, this colour, but they are much stiffer and basically are more aimed at track stuff. But what you've got to remember is, depending on where the bush is on the car, like, so these technically are track series stuff, but because these are on the trailing arm, you don't want excess movement, because that is directly affecting your alignment. So generally speaking, if it's something that controls the steering or direction of the wheels, you want a nice stiff bush. If it's something that's there to absorb impacts, shocks from the road, you know, and transfer them to the chassis, then you want a softer bush that's more compliant, you know, to make sure the road, make sure the cabin comfort isn't reduced. So that's why, even though this is Road Series, some of these bushes are black. And there we go, that's the diff carrier set up. So there is one other job to do before we can call this finished, and that is to tap the threads on the back where the diff mounts in. So you might not be able to see particularly well on the camera, but essentially these threads end up, when you get the stuff shot blasted, you'll get the shot blast is quite aggressive. So it will coarse up the threads. I don't know if that's the right technical term, but you'll end up roughing up the threads, and then when you put the bolt in, sometimes the bolt doesn't go in that nicely. So I've got a bolt here to hand, so if I just wind that in, you'll see it get so far, and then yeah, there you go, it sort of goes tight. So what I like to do is just run a tap through there, just for peace of mind, so you get a nice clean thread. So that's a M12 by 1.5. So we're just going to smash that in there, and make sure those threads are all nice and clean, and then we can call this one done. So next up, that's all done. We're going to smash on with these lovely spring perches. So again, these are a suspension. Yeah, they control the arm position. So these are going to be like Black Series essentially, stiffer bush. For anyone who doesn't know, these are sided, these arms. So when you refit them, you need to be mindful that there's a particular side. The way you can tell them apart is only looking at this front end here and just figuring out one of these pieces of metal on here is very slightly longer. So obviously they're a symmetrical arm, but that's the only way you can tell them apart. And the bushes for these are sided as well. So you've got a fat side and a skinny side. I can never remember which way, so what I'm going to do is scan the QR code on there. There we go, and then PowerFlex show you which way to fit that bush. Pretty simple. So basically the skinny side goes on the arm, you know, the longer bit of the arm. There we go, and then that's the arms built up. Just to note, sometimes you get a bit of powder coat stuck on the edges, and the bushes can be quite hard to get in, so you can trim that away with a Dremel or something similar. But yeah, they're good. So then on to the trailing arms. So with the trailing arms, you need to be careful. You shouldn't use PowerFlex or any polyurethane bush everywhere. Because this suspension arm articulates under load, you really need to use a selection of ball joints, particularly if it's a drift car or a full-on track car. Because what happens is with a polyurethane bush, the bush is really good if there's load in one direction, but when the bush has to work in two directions, it tends to bind rather than rotate nicely. So on the 328s and everything beneath, on the rear arms, you have a ball joint on the top. So this is basically like a pivoting joint that can rotate, you know, freely. And then a bush, you know, similar to this, like a rubber bush, a solid rubber bush in the bottom. M3s, however, use this top and bottom because it gives a slightly better articulation through the movement of the arm. Now, what you can do, if it's a fully fledged track car, in an ideal world, you'd actually use a spherical bearing here as well. So rather than this, you can put spherical bearing there, which is, you know, the ultimate setup. But the trouble with that is they're very expensive. You pay about 300 quid. And often The issue with bearings like this is that they tend to wear faster. And obviously at 300 quid for a pair of them, it's a lot of money. For like an occasional track car or like just a normal road car, these are fine. The lower bush, you can use either. Technically, it's an upgrade to put a ball joint in the bottom. On this particular car, I'm not going to because I've got some old bushes to use up. But as long as the top bush is a ball joint, you know, that's the bare minimum you must do. If you put a polyurethane bush here, all that will happen is the bush will fatigue very quickly because of the articulation, and then you'll need to replace the bush. So just to recap, in a perfect world, track car, use Ferrocoat everywhere. On just a normal fast road car, your best setup really is a poly at the front and then a spherical bearing top and bottom. But as standard, like a 328 will come with a rubber bush here, rubber bush at the bottom, and a ball joint at the top. So if you want to put a ball joint in the bottom, you can just use the top bush straight in the bottom, no issues. These are pretty cheap. You can put these up for about 20 quid each. So technically they're cheaper than using Powerflex anyway. But like I say, I've got a pair of bushes kicking around. I don't sell them because I never recommend them for customers' cars, because why would you just fit these? But I've got a pair of bushes, so I'm just going to use them anyway. In terms of the rest of it, there's a few bits and pieces to look at. So obviously I've done new handbrake shoes and a fitting kit, so that's lovely, along with new dust shields. New handbrake cables, these are cheap, no brainer. I've got ABS sensors to go back in there, so they'll go in here, lovely. And then we need to look at our brake setup. So at the moment it's a 270mm disc or 274mm disc, and it's a vented disc, so it's the biggest non-M brake setup you can get. But what I'm going to do is probably swap that out and run a 320D E36 setup, which works for these dust shields. You can get a 294mm disc and slightly bigger piston in the caliper. So technically it's a brake upgrade, it's not too expensive, and it looks a bit better because it fills this up. I haven't got one to hand, but I'll get that sorted and you'll see that in a later episode. So obviously we're going to replace the brake lines on the car, but you need to factor in some of the bracketry, I should say, that lives on the car. So some of these cars have two flexi lines at the rear on each side and a little intermediate line, like a hard line. What I do generally is bin all of that and then swap to like an early setup like this car has, like a 95 setup, where basically you just have one long flexi line, a simple bracket. They're about 10 quid per side from BMW, so it works out cheaper, it's cleaner, it's quicker to install, quicker to service in the future. If you stick with a 4-line setup, which is the 2 lines either side, you've then got to make the little hard line in the middle. The cost of that, you pay more for the brake line kit because there's, you know, more unions. And also the bracketry, if you replace that bracket from BMW, it lives here, it's like 50 quid per side these days. So in my mind, that's a no-go. Stick with like the early 328 setup, and you get like a single long line, which works fine. So yeah, I haven't ordered any of that stuff yet. I need to. But yeah, so that's kind of where we are with that. So for now, let's just get these polys in. And then in a later episode, I'll show you the brake upgrade once I've sourced it. And then these are the lower bushes I'm using. Like I said, I don't recommend these personally. I'm only using them because they're old stock that I had. They're fine, there's nothing wrong with them, but in an ideal world, you're better off just using the ball joint top and bottom. So that's the arm built up. Powerflex bush at the front, Powerflex bush at the bottom for this build, but like I said, don't recommend that. Ball joint at the top. There's our extended toe brackets, because obviously the car's going to be run low, so we will need those. They're going to live in there, like so. So I'm going to make the same thing happen on that arm. So we do need, we've got our anti-roll bar. So just a quick mention on anti-roll bars and E36s. So if you run a Sport, or if you've got 318 IS or 328 Sport, you'll have an 18mm rear anti-roll bar, chunky boy, and then the front is usually a 25mm. If you've got a lowly spec car like a 320, 318i, something like that, you can fit anti-roll bars from a Sport. They're beefier. Obviously that will limit body roll, so that's a good little upgrade if you're doing this. So if you've got like a crappy spec car, you might not necessarily want to keep your original anti-roll bar, because technically it's not that good. You can run aftermarket stuff. This car, with it being a sport, I'm just going to leave the sport anti-roll bars on there. It's never going to be a track car. So we are going to use some black powerflex mounts because we don't want any movement here. And then drop links. You can buy polyurethane inserts for these. They're a pain in the arse to do, and this is soft alley. So again, for the money and the hassle, I'm happy just sticking a pair of stock drop links on it. These last forever anyway, so straight on there, onto the end of that. We've got a few bits that need to be clipped on. So these little plastic trim clips, they hold the ABS sensors and stuff to the spring perches. I'm not going to fit them now because I can't remember which way, depending on which arm they go on the car. But basically, when you strip your frame apart, you want to keep these because they're about £5 a clip from BMW. So yeah, I've got a whole heap of them saved, so they'll go on at a later date. Same with the boxes. These, I have no idea how much these are, I never bought them, but we will reuse these and put them back on our subframe. So they sort of live there like that. So a pair of them, so be careful when you're stripping your subframes. If you damage them, it's going to cost you more money, and there's no need to really replace them. It's a bit of plastic that holds a cable. It doesn't need to be replaced necessarily. So let's get our anti-roll bar dressed up. That slide on. These are sided. One's got a metal insert. There's the metal insert, and that side isn't. Obviously the side without gets put onto the anti-roll bar. These can be a bugger to fit. It's a real tight fit usually. So that's kind of the bulk of getting that built up at this stage. I've got a whole heap of stuff I still need to order and sort. Obviously the shelve's not technically ready for this stuff yet, but knowing that stuff, when you order stuff these days, most stuff turns up pretty quickly, but some stuff you've got to order. Some of the bits from the dealer on back order and stuff like that. So like I'm going to get a brand new bolt kit from BMW. It's not a thing you can buy. You can't buy a bolt kit, but it's something I pieced together using OE part numbers. Again, if you're interested in that, I'm going to add that to my website to make it really easy, because it's a bit of a pain in the arse going through all the part numbers and knowing what you need. There's a few bits and pieces I upgrade, like I run the E90 subframe bolts rather than E36 ones. But yeah, so that'll be coming soon. So I need to order a bolt kit for the rear end. I need to order a brake line or braided line kit for the rear end because I haven't got any flexies. I need to figure out my brake setup, i.e. am I going to go 320D or am I going to stay 328? Probably going to go 320D. You know, I've got it all apart, why wouldn't I? What this does mean is that because I've gone to town on the rear end, the front end's going to need doing next. Fun. But yeah, it's all coming together quite nicely. So all of that's pretty much ready to be put on the shelf. Well, it's ready to go on the car, but we'll put it on the shelf and come back to it when we're ready. And for those of you who remember what the old subframe looked like, you don't need to see this bit, but if you didn't see my original video stripping this apart, that's what the original subframe looked like, or very similar to this. This was returned from someone, a customer, but this was their old subframe, and this is what most E36 subframes look like. This is one of the worser ones. It's not the worst, but it's pretty crusty, and on the underside it's actually rotten. Here you can see I hit it with a hammer, but it was already thin, so this one's going in the bin. It's not reusable. I might pillage off this bracket if it's any good. But yeah, you got to be careful. Obviously all these cars are old. They don't tend to rot out subframe components too bad. Usually you can salvage stuff, but sometimes stuff goes in the bin. So yeah, if you're going to do this job yourself, just bear in mind, you know, check before you get stuff powder coat, check it over, make sure it's physically sound and solid. Like I said at the beginning of the video, if you need help with any of this stuff, give me a shout. Do this, you know, day in, day out these days. So any bits you need, bushes, bolts, brakes, all that stuff, give us a shout, any questions or whatever. But yeah, it's only a quick video. Sorry if I've been rambling too much. But yeah, thank you for watching. Hopefully the next video might be of the car actually outside. So yeah, it's not going to be driving, but we're going to push out the workshop, drag out into the daylight, I think. Yeah, so I will hopefully catch you in maybe 2 or 3 weeks with more progress on the coupe. But as I said to you recently, The quarter's on, the seal's mostly on, the fuel neck area is done, and here we are assembling subframe stuff. So, you know, shit's happening, which is good. Anyway, thank you for watching, peace out, and I will see you in a couple of weeks.